Before I was paralyzed, there were 10,000 things I could do. Now there's 9,000. Should I cry about the 1,000 I lost or celebrate the 9 I have?
Welcome to the QBC podcast, where we explore exciting new paradigms that have a meaningful impact on our day-to-day lives. I'm your host, Meredith Oke. Let's keep the conversation going. Join us in our free community by visiting qbcpod.com. That's qbcpod.com. And let's see where the quantum superhighway takes us next. Hello, fellow travelers on the quantum superhighway. Welcome to the season of peace, calm, reflection, designing our intention of what is to come. It's so important that we take the time to do this. And on that note, I really want to highlight something that I think is super important. So for all of you who are such keen intellectual seekers with deep intellectual curiosity, which is, of course, a beautiful thing and something that is much needed to expand civilization from where it is now and move into what is truly a higher good for all of us, I want to bring a little seasonal reminder that the intellect is not a substitute for transformation. The intellect, in fact, can sometimes be a distraction, or even for some of us, I may speak from experience here, an escape from direct experience. So whatever is going on for you in your life right now, I wish for you to be in it fully and experience the emotions of it and whatever is coming up, because this is a capacity that we all need. And it's much more comfortable for some of us to stay in the intellectual realm where we're continuously learning new things and it's so exciting and fun. But sometimes what we need is not more facts, not new facts. Sometimes what we need is a new frame. Sometimes we don't need another health protocol. We need to personally develop ourselves, our character. We need to take total responsibility for all of ourselves, not just the intellectual part. And I say this because it's just coming through as something that's really important. And I know that a lot of you come to the internet and come to this podcast to learn new things and have your minds blown. And I love it. And I love that journey. It's incredible. However, we also need to balance it out, because if we skip the direct experience of our lives and stay too deep in the intellect, we will lose coherence. We will go into dissonance. It doesn't matter how high level or important that information is, whether it's spiritual information or scientific information, and what's the difference really, who knows? But if it's just information and not real living, which usually involves other humans and our connections with them, it will eventually pull us into dissonance. It will pull us into dissonance personally, as a community, as a culture, as a society. And I think we're navigating a really interesting time right now where there's so much new information to learn. There's so much new energy being kicked up and coming down around the planet. There's just so much going on. We really need to cultivate the capacity and take that responsibility to keep ourselves grounded and to have real life and to appreciate and acknowledge that real life is just as important as the information that we love to consume and that we love to learn. Whenever I do an episode on that's more sort of coaching oriented or personal development oriented, I often hear someone say something like, you know what, I was going to skip that one because what does that have to do with anything? But I was driving in the car, it was on autoplay, and it just came on, and wow, it was actually really helpful. So my request to you, and I know a lot of you do this anyway, but if you don't, take a moment to put yourself in the field of somebody who can really support you and all of us to step into our direct experience. And my guest today is that person. He has 50 years leading spiritually grounded experiential seminars to help people to connect to their soul and to help people live at their highest capacity. He has led seminars in front of hundreds of people, thousands of people, tens of thousands of people. This is a real gift and a real cultivated talent to be able to do that. And I'm so grateful that he shared an hour of his time with us. His name is Russell Bishop. He has written multiple books and founded multiple programs that have dramatically changed people's lives all over the world. And I highly, highly encourage you to spend some time with him. It is coming up right now. It will bring a real shift for you, I hope, for this holiday season as we take the time to really make sure that our field is coherent so that all of the new gifts that are coming in the new year have a solid and safe space to land, and that we can all step into our ultimate highest capacity. You are all so, so valuable. We need you all. We need you all running in the best possible way. I appreciate you all so very, very much. And I thank you for sharing this time with me. And I know that Russell is going to really add something to your lives this holiday season. All right. Don't forget to visit my friends at bondcharge.com. Put QBC in the little box for a discount. And I also really recommend downloading My Circadian app. You can put My Circadian in the App Store and find it. It's a beautiful, easy-to-use app that will connect you to nature's rhythm so that you can support your health and your circadian biology by being coherent with Mother Nature, of which we are all a part. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Russell Bishop, welcome to the QBC podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to what comes forward today.
So am I. And thank you so much for that beautiful invocation that you opened our interaction with. I think it really set the tone for opening up a space for the two of us and anyone who cares to join us to go on their own personal journey. So I was going to start somewhere fun because I was listening to an interview with you and my daughter was in the room and I didn't know she was paying attention. And all of a sudden, she's 11. All of a sudden she said, Mom, that man's really right. Sometimes it is really simple, but it's not so easy.
Well, that's good.
And she said, and then she went on to say, like being the seeker when you're playing, what's the game they play at Hogwarts? Anyway, she's like, it's very simple. All you have to do is catch the snitch, but it's not easy. It's not easy, Mom, to catch that snitch. So let's just open it up there because I think a lot of the time, most people listening are on some sort of journey, whether it's a personal health journey or a journey of owning their own business related to health. And I think sometimes we forget, we're like, oh, it's so simple. Why aren't I doing it better? Or we make it complicated when it actually is simple. And you've had so much experience with human nature. Help us out.
Yeah, it might be helpful if I give a little thumbnail about some of my background because that informs and has for a very long time the work that I do. I was raised in a Presbyterian family. We had 4 ministers in the family, and so I was at church a lot, but I always had sort of a conflicting experience. On the one hand, I loved it, and on the other hand, I hated it. And later I was able to identify what I loved was actually the music. Because the music, in my spiritual practice, we think of 2 principal connections into spirit, light and sound. And of course, music is sound. And almost everybody can relate to music of one kind or another. And for me, I just opened and I kind of soared with the music. But when they started doing all their talk and, blame and all that kind of stuff, I said, well, maybe not so much. So I didn't have the conscious awareness at the time, but that connection into spirit is what I was experiencing. Also, because we have a little bit of a health focus in here, I had 14 surgeries by the time I was 14.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Some of them were accidents. I went through 2 windshields when I was a little kid, way before seatbelts were around. And I guess the one way to say that is they had to keep knocking me out. So
I was going to say that's a lot of anesthesia in a short period of time on a little body. And a little consciousness.
Back then when they used ether,
Oh,
which
good grief.
is like, I thought, oh my God, they're trying to kill me again. So in any case, my father wound up dying of leukemia when he was 42. I had just turned 19, and a bunch of circumstances not worth going into right now, but it bankrupted the family, and I wound up, I had an old beater of a car, which I lived in for a while. And that was actually grace in many ways, because as challenging as it was, I mean, I had literally $6 to my name. I never felt like I was in trouble. I just felt like, okay, so that's how this is right now. And it was truly experience of being in the now, in the moment, that began to open up the distinct awareness for me that there's a difference between my experience and my circumstance.
Right.
It can author the quality of my experience independent of what's going on circumstantially. And I began to see the difference between some people experience their circumstance as their experience of who they are, as opposed to the condition.
Like there's no gap, there's no choice.
Exactly. So in 1968, a guy named Fritz Perls, who was considered the creator of Gestalt therapy, wrote a book called Gestalt Therapy Verbatim, which I read. He used to be a psychoanalyst who did traditional psychoanalysis, so 3 sessions a week for 7 years. He said, all of my patients after 7 years had well-analyzed problems. And now they just had stacks of reasons why they should have the problem. But he said he discovered that what he said, simple awareness can be curative. So he changed the therapy he did with people to basically asking questions. What are you experiencing? Well, where did that come from? Well, what choices can you make? What choices did you make? And all of the notion of, he said, responsibility is the ability to respond. So he's helping people notice how they chose responses and how that then created the quality of their experience. Now, I was 20 at the time when I read that book. And that put me on a path of saying, I want to work with people in that regard. And when I applied to graduate school, I wrote in the application, give you a window into my arrogance at the time, which may or may not have been diminished much. I said, I'm willing to let you have me a student as long as I don't have to take any of your courses. But
okay. This audience will appreciate the wisdom of that, actually.
Well, yeah, it was really kind of interesting because the chairman said, before we throw you out on your ear, what are you talking about? And I said, well, you're going to want me to write a null hypothesis for a thesis. Yeah, he said, yeah. And you're going to want me to prove it at the 0.5 or 0.1 level of significance, meaning at 0.5 only 5 times out of 100 or 0.1 only 1 times out of 100. Could this have shown up by chance? He said, yes. I said, so if we go through these bookshelves lined with the theses that have been done heretofore, will we not find this one with proof that this one has the opposite proof? And so they can't both be true, can they? And he kind of went, never thought of that. I said, so what you really don't want here, and this again, the brashness of the time, you're not really interested in what's true. You're just interested in what we can put together within some kind of statistical summary. Well, what do you propose? He said, well, rather than having a theory or a null hypothesis, what I want to do is I just want to bring different people into the campus who can work with groups of students for over the course of a year or maybe 2, and simply chronicle what changes take place without a theory about what changes should take place or which modality is more effective than the other. So that what became my thesis. And he did say, well, you're going to have to take 3 of our courses. You know.
All right. We'll take a few.
I surrendered. Okay, fine. But that then put me on this whole path of beginning to understand that knowledge is always present, but I may not be present with the knowledge.
Oh, that's quite profound, Russell.
Yeah, well, I didn't have the language for that till much later. In fact, someone once said, peace is present, Russell. You just may not be present with the peace. And that's when a bunch of dominoes clicked together and went, oh, that's what that's about. I wound up doing a lot of work in the Gestalt world in various kinds of encounter groups and Gestalt therapy and national training labs and sensitivity training and, on and on and on. Because I was just enthralled with what that process of self-discovery was. So shortening this story by quite a bit, by the 70s, I was running a personal development course called Mind Dynamics, which is something I had personally experienced and found it amazing how much change people made in a couple of days. And in 1978, in concert with my spiritual teacher, whom I wrote a letter saying, hey, I'm sure the people are doing well spiritually in this group, but boy, they can't handle the real world very well. And he called me and I didn't expect
where the rubber meets the road.
Boom. Exactly. So he said, what did you have in mind? I said, well, I can design a training program, an experiential seminar that would help people translate what they are learning spiritually into how they make choices in the real world and how they create the experience of life. We spoke at length. We got together in person and he said, well, let's try it. And so in January of 78, Insight Seminars was birthed in Santa Monica, California. I thought it was going to be a once in a while kind of thing, but strictly by word of mouth, it wound up as a 501c3, a not-for-profit. It wound up in 43 countries around the world. It was all built on this notion of awareness.
Right.
And so and this I think will be really important for those listening here. We subtitled the program. We didn't really have, later on we had an Insight 1, 2, 3, and a whole bunch of stuff sort of using an educational model, but we called Insight the Awakening Heart. Not mind, body, or emotions, but heart. Mm-hmm. And using heart as the center of the soul, to sort of trying to make something spiritual, physical, but also the principle of awakening was huge. And so I would say to people, this is going to be two really stupid questions. The first one is obvious. If you are awakening, what were you before? Asleep. Uh-huh. Well, here's the question no one ever asks. If you were asleep, what were you before that? Awake. Ah. So all this focus on transformation and change is assuming that something is amiss and it has to be changed into something else. But what if it really is all I have to do is awaken to something that's always been present? Now, let me tie that back to church. The word religion comes from the Latin root word ligare, which means to connect or bind together. And the prefix re means again. So truly what religion means is to reconnect, which begs the question of reconnect to what? And so Insight the Awakening Heart, becoming more of who you already are. And without being preachy to anyone, we never said you're a soul, you're a spirit. Just people would come into that awareness in their own way and their own language. So I like to say God never named itself. So have that, and I don't care what we call this, but let's find it, and the core essence of it will be loving. So that's sort of the background to what's informed my work over these many years.
That's so beautiful. And I'm really struck. I'm thinking back to how you explained what you wanted to do to the head of the department at graduate school. And it was to observe people without an expectation, something along those lines, right? Like you wanted to take away the expectation of having them fit into your hypothesis or not, and just allow them to do what they need to do, which strikes me as an incredibly loving approach, because I think so many of us often feel, even if it's not articulated, although a lot of the times it is articulated, that we're kind of continuously gauging if we're meeting the expectation of somebody or something, whether it's to feel better physically or show up, or so to have the intuition or the knowledge to create a space where people were just free to have their own experience, like that seems quite profound.
Yeah, it certainly turned out to be that way. I had no idea what it was really going to lead to. But boy, brain cells fade. This is gray hair. And I was told gray hair is gray matter leaking out. So a longshoreman and a philosopher.
Oh, Eric Hoffer.
Exactly. Hoffer. How could I forget that?
My husband and I are reading his book right now. So I heard you reference him in one of the interviews I listened to. Yes.
Exactly. And so the way I paraphrased that was, you can never get enough of what you don't really want. And so that's profound.
Right. Yes. Because we're locked into seeking things.
Absolutely. And sort of the myth that people tend to lead is that if I only get enough of X, then I'll be happy, or then I'll be full, or then I'll have peace. And so in sort of the Western world, it's, well, let's just put off all that stuff because we have to go acquire. But as soon as we've acquired, whether it's a house, there could be a bigger house, or a car, a better car, a certain amount of money. And so in Insight, well, we would, on a big easel pad, 2 columns. The left column was labeled symbols, and the right column was labeled experience. And we say, so what if, in symbols, we just say, those are the things that people pursue a lot of in life. What are they? And so people would make their list, and we put it up, and it always goes things like money, house, job, car. And some people would say relationships. So it's kind of like, the trophy, family, whatever. And we say, so let's take money, because most people think they want more money. What's the positive experience that you associate with that, having enough money? If I had enough money, then I could experience. And some people would say travel. I said, no, that's what you could do. So it's not about buying more stuff. And what would the inner experience be if you had enough money? And people say, well, eventually security, peace of mind, fulfilled.
Yeah. Freedom.
So in other words, what we're after is peace and loving and caring, but we're pursuing this other thing. And there's no direct relationship, because there's people with tons of money and they're not very secure, and people with tons of money there are, and people with no money and they're secure, and da-da-da-da-da. So let's take all those definitions out. And if you can focus on the right-hand side column of the quality of experience, then the question is, what experience are you looking for? How could you produce it? And then that awakens people to go, oh, my God, you mean my experience is my choice? What a possibility. So big stuff.
It is big. And so in your experience, what happens when people choose to live from there? So instead of saying, okay, I have to wait until I have the money I think I'm supposed to have to feel peaceful and free, I can just feel like that right now. And then what do you see happen when, like, are they able to make that choice? And then what happens?
What happens when people make that conscious choice? Well, we call it what if.
Okay.
We said, this isn't anything to believe. None of this. Just play the what if game. What if it is true that if you focus on experience, life will change for the better? What if it is true that the consequences I'm experiencing come from the choices I make, not the victimhood? Because Fritz Perls really had a brilliant distinction between victim and accountable. Mm-hmm. And we'd ask, so, let's just take a look at anything in your life. If it's been positive, were you the victim of something out there? Very few people plays victim to positive, but if it's negative, they go victim. So we said, well, let's try to take a look at how are my circumstances a function of my choices, and then even regardless of circumstance. So Viktor Frankl comes to mind. How do you discover that freedom is a choice? Well, in the Nazi internment camp. I mean, wow, talk about consciousness. So if people play what if, then what usually becomes interesting, the amount of money or the job I have become less important, but easier to have.
Right.
Because I'm not attached to the thing, because I've already produced the experience inwardly.
Right.
That's qualitatively and quantitatively different.
So I move toward the symbols or the signals of what I want more easily when I'm coming from the experiential state that I wanted in the first place as the result of those things.
Absolutely. And what's from a Buddhist perspective, when you're in that space, you approach life without attachment.
Right.
And it's attachment that usually creates our pain and our suffering, and also blocks us from achieving that which we might otherwise achieve, which also can be interpreted as we might otherwise experience. So we used to ask people these questions all the time that said, so have you ever been at peace? Well, yeah. Well, when you were at peace, did you ever say, wow, I'm at peace? No, because you're too busy being at peace. But when you left the peace is when you noticed you were at peace. And so the question becomes, what did you have to focus on to leave the peace? If you're in a loving relationship with someone, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, son, daughter, whatever, what did you have to focus on to leave the loving you had for that person? And that's like a bombshell in people's brains to go, oh my God, yeah. As soon as I focus on this, that shows up. Now, is the thing you're focused on leading you towards the positive experience you want or the negative experience you want? Now, the critics of the world go, oh, just more of that positive thinking, psychobabble crap. I go, well, no, not really. When I was editorial director at Huffington Post for a while, I wrote a series of articles every Monday, and one I put up was called Why Positive Thinking Just Doesn't Work. Now, the Huffington Post pioneered the thing of having real live community and comments. And so people would throw up on some of my articles every month, and then I'd copy some of their comment and put it in the next month. I go, well, there's a great way to sort of miss the point without being condemning, just to say, so let's see what's missing here. And it's understandable it could be missing because of the programming we've all gone through, so on and so forth. So this was the peak of frustration. And when I write these articles or when I write my books, I always do the same thing. I sit down in front of the computer, in front of my little keyboard, and I go, Father, Mother, God, show me what to be written today in ways I can understand, and with the clarity to put it down. And I don't have notes. It just comes through and I write it. So that title showed up that morning, Why Positive Thinking Just Doesn't Work. And what I said in the article was, of course, positive thinking doesn't work. Positive action works. But how do you take a positive action without a positive thought? And so what positive thinking really means, do you have a positive focus? So I have a good friend who used to be a cable car gripman in San Francisco, and he was riding to the cable car barn one day in the 60s on his motorcycle when a laundry van ran the stoplight. His gas tank exploded and burned his face off, burned his fingers down to no finger nub was longer than my little pinky fingernail. So just mention that. Several years of surgeries. When he finally was recovered, he became the mayor of a small town in Colorado, and he was a pilot at the time. So he was taking off to go to the annual mayor's conference in DC when the plane crashed, and he wound up paralyzed. And so here's a guy paralyzed, looks grotesque. I mean, he can still pick things up, but with these little nubs. And he writes a book. It's not what happens to you, it's what you do about it. And
wow.
He said, before I was paralyzed, there were 10,000 things I could do. Now there's 9,000. Should I cry about the 1,000 I lost or celebrate the 9 I have? And so the epitome of what you do with a positive focus, No one's saying, oh, it's fantastic, I'm paralyzed and my face is burned off. No, that's the circumstance. Now what do I do with it? So back to how do I author my experience? His name is Mitchell, and he has a website called wmitchell.com. And people can watch some incredible videos of this guy.
Wow. Yeah, that is a really powerful message to come from someone who experienced not once, but twice.
Whew. Yeah, huge. Just amazing.
So to what would you attribute a person's ability to do that, to live the way Mitchell is living? Is it, I mean, your most recent book is Soul Talk. Is Mitchell more soul powered than someone who lives in victimhood? What are your observations / thoughts?
Yeah, that's great because we've chatted about that a few times. Not telling any school tales out of school, but he doesn't have a spiritual focus that he would call spiritual. Mm-hmm. Because I think he would think more things in religious, traditional religious terminology. But the soul is present whether we want to call it a soul or not. And it doesn't care what we call it because it didn't name itself either. Oh. So I think something is inside each of us, again, that wants to awaken. And when we awaken, that's when this power of choice becomes more evident. Now, as a person awakens, it's not like asleep, awake, done. No, it's awakening. It's an ongoing process. So as I awaken to my next level of consciousness, I can look back and see all the crumbs on that path that I never noticed along the way. I went, oh, wow, yeah, I did that back then. Well, if I did that back then, what can I do now? So what's the choice in front of me right now that wants me to awaken to so that I can make the next step in expanding my life? And we can get into all the neuroscience behind all that. There's a lot of theory about what's there and what's in my genetic coding and my DNA and all that kind of good stuff. But yet people can learn, even if they don't come sort of naturally predisposed to this. But if I preach at them, you can make a choice and you can do this and da-da-da-da-da, it's just like, oh, get away. But if I simply ask, what are you experiencing? Do you like that? If so, well, great. How would you have even more of it? You don't like it. Well, what could you do to change it? And if we just keep persisting in what could you, how could you, people slowly take the blinders off and start to see. And once a person has begun the process of seeing and actualizing what they see, it becomes something that has its own momentum that we can build on. But it really helps like crazy to be in a community. And I don't mean I live in Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara is a place, but not necessarily a community. A community of the people that I hang with who have a like focus. Because if I'm surrounded by people with a like focus, if one of us starts to slip, there's consciousness around us to help support us. Now, most people these days are choosing communities that are not all that uplifting, especially when we start looking at the political world.
Yeah.
And that becomes a perfect example of, well, what does you have to focus on in the news today in order to ruin your day? And if you didn't open the news that day, would your day have been different? So asking people that kind of stuff. Now that starts to open some doors or windows to other parts of the universe, which are really interesting, which is about the power of thought. So I like to remind people that the universe, just go back to school. What they tell us the universe is made of, it's energy. Can you create energy? No. You can generate it, but you can't create it. Can you destroy energy? No. What can you do with it? Well, you can change its form. Well, what's that mean? So I'll ask people, and something maybe your listeners here would be interested in, just matching along the way. Anybody listening to the BBC radio right now? Dumb question for you. Are you listening to the BBC right now, Meredith?
No.
Is the BBC in the room right now?
No.
Yes, it is. That's the trick. Because what is BBC radio? It's a frequency upon which rides information. So at 9 o'clock, the show is X, and at 10 o'clock, the show is Y, but it's always the same frequency being broadcast. Now, if you had a radio in your room, you could attune to the BBC. That's why I say, is the BBC in the room? Yeah. The difference is, for those kind of frequencies, we need an external device called a radio. What if I'm the radio? What if I'm the TV? You ever have pictures come into your mind? You wonder where they came from?
Yes.
That's a great question.
Yes. Or a person, and then the next day they call.
All of that. I don't recall the article. I read it about 4 or 5 years ago. Somewhere up in one of the Harvard Northeast teaching hospitals or universities, someone discovered a device that can detect your thought without any physical contact to your body. So we know we can put probes all over your head, and then we can watch what happens, which part of the brain, and yada, yada, yada. Well, this thing sits outside the body, and it can detect your thought. It can't tell you what you're thinking. It can just detect the changes in thought, which is one of the first beginnings to say, hey, wait, this is an energetic process. Just like the BBC radio is an energetic process, just like light is an energy. When you run it through a prism, you see colors that were always there, just not visible. So if we begin to play with it, you go, well, so what is thought then? What is a being? What is aliveness? What is energy? And that's the kind of stuff that becomes very interesting. So during COVID, I did a lot of free coaching and counseling, most particularly for families, because their kids were getting stressed. And we said, well, now, how much do you and your partner spend stressing over COVID and the change and the economy and the da-da-da-da-da? You talk about it with your kids? No. But are they picking it up anyway? Yes. Because stress is just another frequency or another, maybe like a content riding on the frequency of who you are. And the kid picks up who you are, and then they pick up that content called stress. Now, most parents will relate to the notion of having a young baby. The baby is just fine, and someone walks into the room and the baby gets all distressed. And that person leaves, they calm down. Or the inverse, the baby's all stressed, a certain person walks in, they calm down. Well, why? And maybe it's the quality of energy that person is holding. And one's easy to flow with and the other is in conflict. So how do we monitor that? So if I begin to think of myself as the radio receiver, so I can pick up, my teacher used to say, you're not responsible for the thoughts that come into your head, only the ones you hold on to. Because thoughts are all over the place. But what if, besides being the receiver, we're also the transmitter? So now what energies am I transmitting into the universe, whether it's with my wife or my family, or whether it's out to the broader universe? And what's the amplification effect when a bunch of us start holding the same thought pattern? And then other people pick it up, and now we're in this kind of thing, which is the predominant pattern today. But I think what's coming onto the planet is a time for greater awakening into loving as the, I guess, preferred way, but perhaps the only way for true life.
Yes. I think it feels to me like we're being shown that. And that right now, it seems to me that a lot of the work we have to do is to disconnect ourselves from whatever would like to be in charge of that frequency and those thought frequencies. I'm thinking of the media and particularly the news, where their business model is to have us in a certain state of
Sure.
fear all of the time. And what I'm hearing you say is that it's up, this soul connection is calling us to choose.
Always. Always.
And I feel like we are choosing collectively towards the love. And I also feel like each time we make a big leap or even a small leap, the fear ratchets up and the headlines become more intense. This feeling of being enveloped by a manipulation every time you open the computer becomes more intense. But I also feel like then we up level again and choose, maybe not everyone, but a lot of us, like making a different choice.
Well, my wife has a sort of a metaphor for how she sees what's going on. She does a lot of work with consciousness and judgments that people hold inside and get locked into their bodies. And then how do you do forgiveness? Not forgiveness of the other, but forgiveness of self. Mm-hmm. And it's really powerful work. But she says the image she has is from a planetary consciousness level, we're in a birthing process. So as a male, I can only relate to birthing from a theoretic point of view, but from a woman who's gone through it, incredibly messy, painful experience that results in joy most of the time. And so she says she kind of sees that as a conscious birthing onto the planet of a new day of loving, but it has to go through all that painful, perhaps even stressful process.
Right. Yes, that feels like an apt metaphor, and the contractions and then the release and we move forward a little bit.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a few minutes ago about, opening doors into some, cosmic, let's call it cosmic science. I know you've been involved in some organizations that are really on the cutting edge of looking at consciousness and where we're headed. From that perspective, what are you seeing happening?
Well, yeah, it's a really interesting thing that's going on right now, because I'll come at this from, there's so many angles to come in on this. So I'm going to come in it from a odd one first.
Okay.
The world of science can pretty much get stuck on itself.
Yes.
And yet there's no such thing as the world of science.
Right.
There's a thing we call science, of which there are many practitioners. But one of the issues that science has dealt with for a very long time is the lack of reproducibility. Just like I told my chairman of the department, well, this thing proved that, well, this one proved that, and they're different. They're in conflict, direct conflict. So how's that if it's real? So what a lot of scientists, there's I think it's called the Center for Open Science, something like that. Mm-hmm. They're really working to provide a very sound set of protocols that start with before you even form your hypothesis. And there's a whole litany of steps that they would like to see people go through, regardless of what area they're looking into. I don't care whether it's vitamins or how do you operate on a liver, whatever it is, that will make it more likely that a true finding can be reproduced. And the reproducibility issue is, people can run an experiment, somebody else runs the exact same experiment with the same protocol and get a different result. So what's that about? Well, some of it is about maybe the actual protocols were not identical. So they're trying to eliminate one of those variables. Now, we all know this thing called the observer phenomena. So maybe the issue is that it's not what's happening apparently, but it's the impact that the observer has, because remember, it's thought and energy that then disrupts something. Way back, I went to school at the University of California at Davis, and Charlie Tart was a professor there. He was one of the early people looking into various paranormal phenomena, and I got to work with him, and we did some very interesting experiments and all the things about, remote viewing, and then we looked at energetic transfer between plants. Like you could hook up a plant to GSR, I guess it was a galvanometric spin response meter.
Mm-hmm.
If you took a cutting from the plant and grew it in another room, you could take a pair of scissors and threaten the plant in room B, and the mother plant in room A would have a measurable spike take place. And those are some early things we were looking at, is what's the nature of energy and how does it communicate? And if it communicates from a plant to a plant, what's that about? So that's still the big question. What's that about? So there's a lot of work going on, and it's, I don't know what the right metaphor is. It's an amazingly conflicted world, because there's people out there who are doing their best to study and observe. Remember, key word, observe, what truth might be about any of these things, whether it's remote viewing or absent healing or just the nature of consciousness, the nature of reality, any of this kind of stuff. And then there are those out there who want to become famous because of it. And those who want to then generate how many grants can they get and how much money. I'm not going to be naming any names here for obvious reasons, but there's some pretty big names out there that seem to be engaging in something called P hacking. Have you heard that term?
No.
P for probability. So you set up your null hypothesis. You say if this happens, then it's it's a P of 01, less than one time out of 100. So they don't get the result they wanted. So then they start running the data to see how it can be manipulated so they can hack the P. And now all of a sudden the study gets produced and nobody can begin to reproduce it because it didn't actually happen. So now you got the problem of the people who are trying to do something and they don't get what they thought. And then they scratch their head and go, so I wonder what it is. And those who go, I didn't get what I want. How can I make it look like I did? And so that creates conflict in the world of the scientific community. So there's a number of folks out there looking to do really high quality works, because we all know intuitively that this thing about it's all energy is real, but we don't have the tools. I keep telling the folks that I work with, what would happen if you ask spirit this question? What do we need that we don't have? And the parallel question, what do we have that we don't need? So what's in the way? And well, why would you ask spirit? Well, because spirit is the source of all energy. So maybe if we could go into that consciousness, we could precipitate down the next step or the next thing that we need in order to move these things along. Now, I thought I had one in there. Well, I don't. You will recognize this.
Yes, we have
this is a high-tech science tool. It's called Paperclip.
Yeah. Okay.
And I haven't done it in a long time, but I would use the larger size paperclip. I'd take a piece of thread about 24 inches long, tie it to one end, and then have a person just dangle it like a pendulum while balancing their elbow. Okay, now I want you to visualize the paperclip swinging back and forth, left to right, and pretty soon it's going, and then north-south, then in a circle. Now visualize it changing, and almost everybody can do that. And I was doing this for a group of MDs up at, I forget, Mass Eye, Mass General, one of those Boston area, leading hospital groups. They were primarily neuroscientists and endocrinologists. And those are two groups who really know that thought changes what happens in the body. So this thing is going like this, and there's one neuroscientist in the back, this is back like around 1980, 81, just goes, "This is all bullshit." And I said, "Oh, interesting. What do you mean?" He says, "You want me to think that my mind is making the paperclip move." I said, "Oh, that's interesting. Did I say that?" He said, "No, but it's still bullshit." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, what's happening is that I'm making little micro movements with my hand or fingers, and because of the length of the string, it's amplified and it looks bigger down here, but it's all because of movement up here." I said, "Well, that's really interesting. And so you think it's bullshit, huh?" He goes, "Yes." I said, "So let me ask you this. Uh, in order for that paperclip to move, even if it's just micro movements up here, did you have to engage a neuromuscular pathway for that to happen?" "Well, yeah." "Well, did you know which neuromuscular pathway you engaged?" "No." "Did you know how you engaged it?" "No." And yet it was engaged. And he kind of sat there dumbfounded. And I said, "So what if the real key is how you hold the focus? And inside your body already knows how to make that happen." And it's sure some little movement up here. I'm not disputing that. But the question is, did you have to know the particulars, or was the result enough to allow the particulars to take place? He still was scratching on his head. I said, "So you deal with people who are paraplegic?" "Yeah." He said, "So what's the problem? Is it neuromuscular? I mean, muscular skeletal?" "No, it's neuromuscular." "What's that mean?" "Well, below the level of injury, no information is getting out." So, I mean, this is like 80, 81, 82, somewhere. And I just said, "Well, what if you could take some little titanium wires and stick it into the motor control center of the brain and hardwire it down to their muscles? Could they think about their arm moving and get the signal out there and have it move because it was hardwired?" Well, guess what? That's what's happening today in the world of prosthesis, as well as people are, I mean, there's images you can see on the internet of a guy who's paralyzed picking up his baby, only by thinking about it. So we're only, this is like the dark ages of what we're learning about what's the nature of energy and thought, and how do you both work with it as it is and harness it for whatever might be. So sometimes these things start out there in the world of that's impossible and become everyday sooner or later.
Yes. And that's such a good example with the paperclip, because it was our thought imaged the result without our conscious intervention on the how. We just got the result.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that kind of thinking has been known in the world of sport for a very long time.
Yeah.
High-end athletes, whether they're gymnasts or skiers or golfers or whatever, visualize the outcome, and their body knows how to produce it. But when you get outside of the world of sport, people go, "Yeah, well, that worked over there, but that won't work over here." Oh, okay. Henry Ford famously said, "It does not whether you believe whether you can or you cannot." You're probably right.
Right. So you're engaged and connected to some people, some scientists who are very curious and engaged in this type of research. So
Yeah.
where's it headed? And if you could, and what are your hypotheses, even if don't have the mechanisms to show it?
Well, it's as I mentioned before, these energies, and the simple ones are things like light. You shine a beam of light through a prism and you see all the colors that are resonant within it. But even that's not true. We see the colors that our eyes are capable of perceiving, and yet animals can perceive colors outside what we can perceive. And the same thing is with sound. We can hear within a certain range. Men hear a certain range, women hear a certain range. They're not the same. And then bring a dog around or a cat or anything else, and there's all kinds of sounds that we don't. So because we don't notice it, we think it doesn't exist. So the basic theory here is there's a whole lot to be discovered around what exists that we do not yet know how to perceive. One area of research that's going on is about telepathy and this whole thing about, well, can you hold a thought? Can it be detected by another person? And then you have this whole thing about, can you influence an electron flow with thought? Sort of a classic experiment, which then produces some baffling results. But it's only baffling because we don't have a framework to understand it yet. So I think the main thing that's going on right now is the understanding is that we only understand a tiny bit. And yet the things we know just enough to either shut us down and going, well, why bother? Or enough to awaken us and enliven us and go, oh my God, what's really possible here? So it's all around what's really possible. And beyond possible, in this world, when you get into the scientific community and conventions and meetings, they talk about paranormal, abnormal, things like that. And I go, so we're starting with a thought assumption that it's not normal.
Right.
So if you already know the observer effect and you come in going, this is not normal, do you expect to find it? No, we expect not to find it, except rarely. But what if it's entirely normal? Just like the little baby who can sense who just walked in the room. And then later we have to train it out of them. Stop being so sensitive. Oh, okay. I'll shut off sensitive. Doesn't mean sensitive isn't there. Now it just shows up in another way. It shows up as a internalized self-judgment, or it internalizes as resentment, which eventually bubbles out in terms of anger. But all it was I sensed something, but I didn't know enough about what I was sensing to either work with it, change it, or get out of it. So the implications for everyday life are huge.
Yes. And it's like the way that you're describing the limitations that we put on science, or that the scientific community puts on itself, are mirrored in the limitations that we put on our own energies.
Yeah.
Like what I'm sort of hearing is where we may have these expanded capacities if we did ask spirit what was needed, instead of trying to figure out how to iterate the machine that we have to the machine that we could to the next version of it. If we did ask spirit, what would that open up in terms of our capacity?
Yeah. Well, there's no way to validate what I'm about to tell you anymore because he's dead. But George Washington Carver may be a name that you know. He was a black botanist just after the Civil War. I mean, he was before that, but so he's a black PhD botanist. I think Georgia, maybe it was Alabama, somewhere down there. And all of these now freed slaves had their land, but the primary crop that they knew was not cotton, it was peanuts. And so now all of a sudden, all kinds of people are growing peanuts. So went in the world of the market, capitalist forces. Supply is way more than demand. So what happens to the price of peanuts? It crashes. So now everyone's producing all these peanuts they can't do anything with. I read that George Washington Carver went out into the field of peanuts, a field of peanuts, sat down with the peanuts, meditated, and asked the peanuts, tell me what to do with you. And he came up with, I think the number was 114 different uses for peanuts. You could use it for dyes. You could make cloth out of them, out of the shells. I mean, it goes on and on and on. But he said the peanuts told him what to do. And that radically transformed the economy for those now newly freed slaves.
I love that. But it might be, I mean, it could possibly be back to where we started. That simple, maybe not easy for some of us, but that simple is that if we're surrounded by all this information and all this energy, and we're only limited to by the, ability of what we think of as our five senses, it could just be that all the information, all the peace, all the everything, all the knowledge is just sitting there waiting for us to open to it.
And it's all, what's really interesting, it's all inside of us too, because it's all energy. So, in Insight, we created something we call a heart chart. And outside the heart, we had opinions, which were thinking and beliefs and all the mental stuff. And the other side of the chart, we had the emotional content and what we feel. Well, I feel this is true is different from it's true. And I think it's true is different from it's true. But in the heart, we said that's a center of natural knowing. And if you can learn how to access your heart, and obviously we didn't mean the physical organ, but another place, all kinds of information becomes available to us, but we have to become available to it. Everybody has what I call an internal bell, just to create a metaphor for it. And people have heard the phrase, well, that rings true. So have you ever had a conversation with somebody and your internal bell just rings?
Yeah.
And you just know it's true?
Yeah.
And you ever had a conversation and the bell goes thud?
Yeah.
Because it ain't true. So we know that. We have the ability to know, which we shut down. Because then we want to run it all through this brain. We already know that there's bundles of neurons in the heart. Just like we knew a few years before that there's bundles of neurons in the gut. When my gut told me, yeah, it did. You just have to learn to listen to it. Well, I knew in my heart, well, you did. But can you expand that to include more and more? So we usually just train people out of it. Oh, be logical. Be rational. I love the word rationalize to frame it as two words, rational and lies. So we can tell ourselves rational lies, and it doesn't change what's true. It just changes our experience of it. So my teacher, he would not say he taught meditation. He taught what he called spiritual exercises. And he said, so, if you want to get strong physically, what do? You exercise physically. Well, if you wanted to get strong spiritually, you might want to do spiritual exercises. So if we wanted to develop these other abilities which are native within us, so that's the theory, it's native within everybody, well then what would you do to strengthen those? So first we have to detect them just to understand if it's even there. But we all know intuitively, for most of us, it is there unless we've really had that beaten hard out of us. But even the most jaded person has had that sense they knew something, they had the intuition. Well, yeah. So what would it do to develop that? And if you look at the word intuition, it's really incredible that I like to look at words from their original root meaning.
Yeah.
And the Latin, Vulgate Latin root for intuition was intuere, which meant to look at. Isn't that amazing? Intuition means simply to look. And my spiritual teacher told me years and years ago, I was about to go in for a procedure called radial keratotomy, which is they use a scalpel to put little slits like bicycle spokes around your iris in the cornea, and it flattened the lens so you could see. I was basically Coke bottle blind at the time. He said, so Russell, the source of the problem is now physical, meaning your eyes, but the source isn't. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, you've been straining for years to see things with your physical eyes that can only be seen with your spiritual eyes. So if we take spiritual eyes and spiritual ears, go inside, what do I need to see? Show me that which I'm not yet. And sometimes we've all had things show up inwardly. So is that an actual muscle that can be trained? Yeah. It is. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that.
Yeah, I love that idea of practicing. Just practicing it, asking, And a lot of my audience is on a health journey, as we all are in some capacity, I guess. And it's just opening up to what's next, what's next on the path, not trying to hit a specific destination.
Well, yeah, years and years ago, I saw a doctor. I was there for general health interest and curiosity, but he did a lot of work with people with cancers and whatnot. He says, people will come in and they'll see me and they'll say, I was just fine. And then all of a sudden, and he said, no, this was at least 12 to 14 years in the making. So now you have an issue. Like, as my eyesight deteriorated, there was actually a physical problem with the eyes, which they could correct. But the source wasn't. So then the question is, well, now how do I move forward with that in this or any other area? And something I like to do for anybody, imagine I've got a couple hundred people in a room to a couple thousand people in a room, and I say, take a hand and make a fist. The hardest, tightest, squeezingest fist you can make. How's it feel? Not so good. Is this hand good for anything? Well, yeah, only a couple things. And if you look at the top of your hand,
yeah,
you can probably even see it on the screen. You'll see that there's parts where they've gone all white, where the blood is left.
Yeah.
And there's parts that are now. You can be a black person, but keep squeezing for a second. And as you keep squeezing, the blood is pooling up, and pretty soon that hand starts to go numb. Now, if you take the other hand and make a hard squeezing fist too, then pretty soon you got all kinds of things. And this is an image of resistance. Only what am I resisting? My own self. And if a person squeezes down inside going, I hate this, or I resent them, or yeah, and you hold, which is all this stuff going on in the political, social world right now. They're squeezing on their own selves and the blood's pooling up. They go numb inside, and the only thing they're left with is the ability to react. Now, if you take those two hands, which we've only been squeezing for less than a minute, at the count of 3, I want you to take one hand and shoot it open, and the other hand open as slowly as you possibly can. Okay?
Okay.
Count of 3. 1, 2, 3. How did the hand feel that you shot open?
Tingly.
And it had a little beat of, but it was, and now it's fine.
Yeah.
What's the other hand like going really, really slow?
It feels still really, really tight.
And it's not very fluid, is it?
No.
And so the question becomes, if you find yourself stuck someplace, do you find yourself in resistance, do you find yourself in pain, did you want to shoot it open? Or just go until finally you just go, oh, it feels fine. And you're not in a very useful hand position. Now, it's just a metaphor. But the question might be, if I'm dealing with a medical issue, what am I resisting inside? Am I resisting some part of me? Am I resisting some part of you? Is it a thought? What am I holding inside that's constricting and blocking the flow? If you get it early enough, like a headache, what do people do with headaches? Pop aspirins or Advil or something. Well, did the headache show up because it wanted to be killed? Or was it there to say, something's going on, let's pay attention, and what's usually going on is stress. And we squeeze down, we squeeze across here, it constricts the flow of blood, the capillaries don't get as enough, and then you have a headache. Now, not all headaches are from that, but many are. So what if you say, I just may need to go in and relax. What tension am I holding? Is it in my TMJ? Is it up here? What's the tension? What am I resisting? What am I judging? And if you can find the thing you're resisting or judging, maybe then you can go, oh, so I release that. I forgive myself for judging. Judging what? Well, I start out judging you, but if the thing I've been talking about is true, we all are part of the same divine energy. As soon as I judge you, I've judged the divine without thinking about it. As soon as I judge the divine, guess what? I'm connected to the divine, so now I've judged myself as well, and I cut myself off from the divine flow. So just like you can cut yourself off from the blood flow, you can cut yourself off from the divine flow. Not that the divine stopped flowing. I just cut myself off from experiencing it. So the sooner I can find where I cut off and release, the more I can move back into flow again, which is then part of the awakening process. But now we have a dilemma. I was running a program with my teacher. We were both co-facilitating, and on a break, he said, "Rusty, you seem so frustrated." I said, "Yeah, they're so slow to wake up." He said, "Oh, Russell, if you had a little baby and it was asleep, would you shake it and say, 'Wake up, grow faster'?" No, because the sleep is part of the growth process. So with the human and consciousness, yeah, bingo.
Yeah.
We may receive something and we may have to sleep on it for a while, because in the internal state, that never sleeps. That's where we have a greater openness for the spiritual flow of education, if you will, that awakens us, and then we can go, oh, now I'm ready for the next phase. So we do have these rhythms, just like the heart has a up and a down, open and a close, a breath in and a breath out. Well, let's let all that happen. And then perhaps the most interesting part of this in my way of thinking about it, I used to do the work the work I used to call transformation. And everyone likes transformation. And I do too at one level. But the word, if you look it up in a dictionary, means a change in form or appearance. Okay. So I say, well, let's pretend I had an old Volkswagen, but I always wanted a Ferrari. You can go online and you can buy a Ferrari car kit, so you get the body. And you can literally do this, and it's designed to go over the frame of a Volkswagen. And now the question is, do I have a Ferrari? No, but I did transform the Volkswagen because it changed the form or appearance. Transmutation is the same thing. It says it's a change in form or appearance to a higher order of energy. Well, now we're progressing, but we still just change the form or appearance, although the energetic flow is different. So imagine you put a different grade of gasoline or something inside of your Ferrari Volkswagen. But the real thing we're after is transcendence. And to transcend something means to rise above, especially over the negative. And so how do we learn to transcend the apparent limitations of my mind, my emotions, what's going on in the world, so I can create the qualitative experience that rises above and stay loving? Nelson Mandela, with all these people who've shown us what it means to be loving in the presence of oppression. So we don't have to be oppressed in the presence of oppression, although from the outside it will look that way. But can I still be free? So we can use all these as inspirations. And inspiration, I have so many of these things. Inspiration comes from a Latin word, inspirare, which means to be breathed by spirit. It's not something that happens to me from the outside. It's the spirit breathes me, and I arise in its awakening. So
we'll step into that, into being breathed.
Yeah.
Russell, thank you so much for your time today. This has been beautiful, and I was going to say transformative. I'll say transcendent.
We can do that. That's okay. See, the challenge is, we need the words to communicate.
Yeah.
But we can use it to communicate to a higher level. So I don't have to say to somebody, oh, wrong word. Just go, okay, so what I think what you may be meaning is the ability to expand in the presence of this. Oh, yeah, that's good. Fine. We'll do that.
Yeah. And that's what I mentioned it before, but I do want to end on it as well, is your approach of there is a real space of allowing in your presence, which I think, from the perspective of the observer effect, has an extremely loving resonance for whomever is getting observed by you. So thank you for bringing that energy to it. It's very profound and important.
Yeah. Well, lest anyone be misinformed, I am not the model of loving kindness. We always teach the thing we most need to learn. So,
yes, no, I will not hold you to that standard all of the time, but
thank you.
You certainly are able to embody it, which is most appreciated.
Well, thank you. Your loving essence radiates beautifully.
Thank you, Russell. Thank you for being here. This has been the Quantum Biology Collective podcast. To find a practitioner who practices from this point of view, visit our directory at quantumbiologycollective.org. If you are a practitioner, definitely take a look at the Applied Quantum Biology Certification, a 6-week study of the science of the new human health paradigm and its practical application with your patients and clients. We also love to feature graduates of the program on this very podcast. Until next time, the QBC.